Hello and welcome to Wholesome Monday, where we read wholesome stories to hopefully fill the world with more happiness and love and joy. But for real life, we are reading Nancy's Mysterious Letter. We are on chapter 3. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time. If you did not tune in for chapter 1 and 2, please, I highly suggest you go back and check those ones out and then come back to here for chapter 3. I will again be posting the audio for chapter 3 on Spotify. So if you would like to just listen and not watch the video for that, or if it's just more convenient, you can head on over to the Spotify that I will link somewhere. I will link it in the description box. And then at the end of each chapter, we do a little mini discussion, talk about the things that we noticed, the character development, things like that. And hopefully you will let me know what you guys think in the comments as well. Just a quick recap. Nancy met the mail carrier Ira Nixon. We found out about his less than agreeable half-brother, Edgar, the mail that held both the envelope full of money for Nancy Drew's dad and a special letter for Nancy Drew herself from England was stolen. We have no idea who stole it. There has been some conjecture that it was Edgar. Without further ado, let's just hop right into chapter 3 and see if we will find any answers. Chapter 3. A baffling note. Mr. Moore's accusation left Nancy speechless for a few seconds. That's right. At the end of chapter 2, the River Heights postal inspector, Mr. Horace Moore, had come to Nancy Drew's door and accused her of breaking the law and saying she was in trouble with the authorities. And that is where we find ourselves at the beginning of chapter 3. Mr. Moore's accusation left Nancy speechless for a few seconds. Finally, she asked him how she had broken the law. The young man looked at her superciliously. She judged that he was not very many years older than she, and his attitude annoyed her. But out of respect for his position, she said nothing. "Miss Drew," he began, "you may not be aware of this, but it is against the law to invite mail carriers into your home while they are on duty." "I see," Nancy replied. "But don't you think this case was an exception? Poor Ira Nixon had been battling the wind for a long time, and he was exhausted. Anyway, he didn't bring his mailbag inside our house. He left it in this vestibule where you are standing." "That's even worse," the aide told her. "Our carriers know the rule. They must keep their bags with them at all times. But this doesn't excuse you." "Perhaps not," said Nancy. "I shall take the matter up with my father, and he will come to your office." Moore was not to be dismissed so easily. In a pompous manner, he asked, "What does your father have to do with this?" Nancy looked him straight in the eye. "The law says that when anyone is accused of a crime, he may consult his lawyer. My father is a lawyer." Her color blinked. I suppose you're right. When the inspector returns, I shall pass the information along to him." Nancy did not comment on this. She knew that the postal inspector was a very reasonable man. Surely he would understand that the case of Ira Nixon was indeed an exception. "Are you aware," she asked Moore, "that Ira Nixon is in the hospital?" "I heard something of the sort, but this doesn't excuse him. And now, if you'll excuse me," Nancy said, starting to close the door. With a mumbled reply, the officious young man turned and left the house. Mr. Drew came home early, explaining that he was so curious about what had taken place during the day, he wanted to get more details from Nancy at once. She smiled. "The whole thing gets more mysterious every minute. Listen to this." She told him about the investigative aide from the post office. When she finished, Mr. Drew burst into laughter. "My congratulations to you on telling him you would turn the case over to your lawyer." Then he sobered. "You are not to blame, Nancy, for the stolen letters. I'm sure Postal Inspector Wernick will agree with us." Nancy asked him how his client, Mrs. Quigley, had taken the loss of her money. Was she very upset? She certainly was, the lawyer replied. My secretary had to bring smelling salts and a cup of black coffee. Finally, Mrs. Quickly began to cry and admitted that she should have followed my advice and sent a check. Father and daughter talked a long time about the whole affair. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call for Mr. Drew. He came back from answering it to tell Nancy an emergency had arisen. I must go at once to see a client. He has been in a bad accident. I probably won't be home until late, so don't wait up for me, Nancy. She and Hannah Gruen ate alone. To cheer up Nancy, the housekeeper suggested that they go to a movie at the River Heights Theater. Nancy smiled. You've talked me into it. I guess there's nothing more I can do tonight on the mystery anyway. By morning, however, the young detective's thoughts were back on the mystery. At breakfast and on the way to and from church, she reviewed the various angles of the mail theft. Dad, do you suppose that Ira Nixon's slight clue about the name Malmesbury, I could get a copy of the letter sent to me? Mr. Drew smiled. I believe so. Tomorrow morning I'll make a phone call to a lawyer friend in London. I'll ask him to look in the telephone directory and see what he can find out for us. That afternoon, Nancy went to call on Ira Nixon in the hospital. He said no tests had been made yet since it was Sunday, but these would be taken care of the following morning. I suppose you are wondering, he said, whether or not I have thought of any more clues to help you find your missing letter. He lowered his voice. Mind you, what I'm about to say, I don't believe down deep in my heart, but it will explain why I fainted yesterday at your house. The mail carrier told about his half-brother Edgar. It was a repetition of what Hannah Gruen had already revealed. Ira added, however, that when Nancy had mentioned a man in a yellow coat with a beat-up car and part of his license plate number, he had thought for a moment it was his brother. But I'm sure it wasn't, he said. Edgar may be an annoyance to me, but I'm sure he's not a thief. Nancy did not comment. Instead, she asked, what did my little friend Tommy mean by a yellow coat? A smile flickered across Ira's face. Actually, it's a camel's hair coat. His hat is, too. A striking outfit, and incidentally, Edgar is rather handsome. A nurse stepped into the room to announce that visiting hours were over for the afternoon. Nancy said goodbye to the letter carrier and left. The following morning, Mr. Drew telephoned her from his office to report that he had talked to his friend in London. I have good news for you, Nancy. There is a law firm in the city by the name of Malmesbury and Bates Jones. I'm sure that's the one, Nancy said excitedly. I hope so, her father replied. In any case, my friend will telephone to them and find out if they sent a letter to you. He'll tell them the circumstances of your not receiving it and request a duplicate. On the other hand, if this is not the right firm, my friend will try to find the person who did write to you. Dad, that's wonderful, Nancy exclaimed. I hope we hear something soon. Her father chuckled. When you were a little girl, Nancy, you were always eager to have things happen. I used to say to you, hold your horses. Now I'm saying it again. Don't get your hopes up too high. Nancy laughed. Spoken like a lawyer, she teased, and then said goodbye. As soon as luncheon was over, Nancy told Hannah Gruen she was tired of staying in the house and waiting for news. I'm going to do some investigating, she announced. Where are you going? The housekeeper asked. To talk to some of Ira Nixon's neighbors. They may give me a clue that will be helpful in tracking down this Edgar Nixon. Despite Ira's faith in him, I think he's a good suspect. Mrs. Gruen agreed and kissed Nancy goodbye. The young detective drove to the other side of town and found Ira Nixon's little old-fashioned home. As she parked in front of the house, two women crossed the street and introduced themselves as Mrs. Maley and Mrs. O'Brien. They wanted to know if Nancy could tell them about the mail carrier's condition. He's better, she replied. In a way, it's fortunate that he got into the hospital. It sure is, Mrs. O'Brien interrupted her. The poor old man doesn't eat right. Yes, her neighbor, Mrs. Maley, agreed and added, he worries all the time about that no-good brother of his. Although curious to learn more about Ira's brother, Nancy commented cautiously, I've heard about Edgar. Tell me, is he really as bad as all that? Well, of course. I don't know what goes on inside the house when he comes there, Mrs. O'Brien went on, but I know the effect on Ira. He's just all in after one of those visits. Mrs. Malley leaned forward confidently. Edgar was here this morning. Of course, he couldn't get in. I guess he didn't know where his brother was, and I, for one, wouldn't tell him. Me either, Mrs. O'Brien declared. That Edgar is nasty. A lot of papers blew off the seat of his car, and he wouldn't take time to pick them up. He littered the street, and we had to go around and clean it up. Nancy asked eagerly, "Where are the papers now?" "We put them in a trash can. Good place for them." "They might be important," Nancy said. "May I see them?" The two women looked at each other puzzled, but led the girl to Mrs. Malley's backyard. She opened the trash can and said, "There they are." Nancy lifted them out one by one. All were letters and looked as if they had fallen into water. Most of the writing was illegible. One had the top torn from it, and all but a few words had been obliterated, but the remaining few caught Nancy's attention. This must be part of the letter which had come to her from London. All that remained was, "Drew, money has been left." "I'd like to take this one along," she said. "Help yourself," said Mrs. Malley. "They don't belong to me anyway. They're just trash." "I suggest," said Nancy, "that you call the postal inspector and tell him about these letters." She rushed home. Her father was there, and she showed the sheet to him and Hannah Gruen. Both were amazed but unable to decipher the intriguing message. "Do you suppose somebody in England has left me some money?" Nancy asked. "It looks that way," her father replied, "but who could it be?" After staring at the paper for a while, Nancy began to calm down. "I'm sure there must be some mistake," she said. "I'm certainly not going to get my hopes up of becoming a millionaire." Her father and Mrs. Gruen laughed and said this was a sensible attitude to take. "But," the housekeeper said, "I hope a copy of the whole letter will come soon. I can't stand the suspense myself." On Tuesday morning, Nancy told Hannah Gruen that she was going on a shopping trip. "You remember I'm going to spend the weekend at Emerson College? I need a few things, and this is a good time to get them." As she was about to pull out of the driveway, Nancy spotted a battered tan car parked down the street. It suddenly occurred to her that Edgar Nixon, or whoever had stolen the letters from the Drew home, might be watching her. At this distance, the person inside the car was too indistinct for her to identify, but she decided to get a closer look and started down the block. At once, the other car moved ahead. As she drew nearer, the driver suddenly turned around. The next second, he shot off at high speed. "He certainly acts guilty," Nancy thought, and gave her own car greater power. Abruptly, the man turned down a side street, went a few blocks without pausing at intersections, and turned left out of sight. Nancy followed as quickly as she dared. When she reached the spot where he had made the last turn, Nancy could see him in the distance. The road proved to be an underdeveloped one, and had no side streets. She was able to follow more quickly and soon almost caught up to him. Now she could see the license plate. It was TJ12796. "That is Edgar Nixon," she thought. "I mustn't lose him." In the next few seconds, Nancy neared a wooden bridge. She was almost directly behind the fugitive now. "This bridge looks pretty rickety," she said to herself. "Do I dare cross it?" Edgar Nixon took the chance and sped over it. He made the distance without anything happening. Nancy went after him but drove cautiously. Her car was much heavier, she knew. When Nancy was at the halfway mark, cracking sounds came from the dilapidated bridge. And that's the end of chapter 3. Okay, I'm pretty sure every chapter is just going to end in a cliffhanger. But this was a good chapter. I have thoughts. A baffling note. First things first. I really love how Nancy's personality comes through her dialogue. Not just her thoughts, but her dialogue. In the very first conversation that she has in the chapter, which is with the inspector's aide, she makes note that he is around the same age as her. Second, she notes that he's annoying. He is not showing her very much respect, but she also chooses to respect his position. So instead of her giving him attitude back, she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I respect that he is the inspector's aide. He's just trying to do his job. I'm going to talk to him. But in the next breath, she's like, you can speak to my lawyer. It's contrasty, right? You get this sense of her character very much through this conversation. So she will show you respect to a certain extent. I will show you respect, but I will take no shit. I guess in chapter 3, we're getting more of the headstrong nature that Nancy Drew is really known for. I don't know if you could call her a feminist, but she's very much an independent woman, right? Or an independent woman. Will respect someone, but will also not let them walk all over her. So that when she gets this attitude from the inspector's aide, she's just like, no way, excuse me. And then she goes to talk to Ira. We pretty much learn nothing, which is fine. I don't know why they constantly refer to her as Hannah Gruen. She must be a live-in maid. She must not be married. Why do they call them Mrs. then? Maybe she's widowed? I don't know how it worked back then in the 1930s. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. I really love how they showed Nancy's relationship with her father in this chapter. When he comes home, he is curious. It says, he was so curious about what had taken place during the day. He wanted to get more details from Nancy at once. He is interested in his daughter's life. He asks her questions. He's involved in her life, obviously. She's sad when an emergency comes up and he can't stay for dinner. And I love how Hannah suggests that they go to the movie theater to cheer her up. It shows a different family dynamic, obviously, because Hannah Gruen is supposed to be the housekeeper, but it seems like she's also a bit more of a mothering figure for Nancy. They do things together, so she's more than just the housekeeper, which kind of makes me reevaluate in chapter 1 when Nancy was talking about the hot cocoa and Mrs. Gruen went off to make it right away. It reframes that to more of a girl coming home and telling her mom, like, oh, we got to make hot cocoa for the mail carrier because it's freezing out and he looked so tired. Do you know what I mean? What other things can I say about this? Oh, yes. And then Nancy also asks him about his day. So there's this back and forth between them, right? About how her day went, how his day went. The next day, he calls her right back in the morning. It seems like, and this is the thing, Nancy's dad seems like he's very busy. He's a very busy lawyer. She calls him prominent. So while he's very busy, he still seems to take time to help his daughter and also not sit around and make her wait. He calls her first thing in the morning. He had no test book. What more can I say? Besides, I love Nancy and her dad's relationship. It seems like such a wholesome relationship, honestly. And I don't know what it was like back in the day in the 1930s. I do know that being a single father back then must not have been easy. And I'm sure he does really appreciate Mrs. Gruen's help. I imagine she helped raise Nancy because her mom died when she was quite young. Did it say how old she was when her mom died, or if she had just died when she was a child? I don't remember, and I'm not going to go searching through the text to find it, but I do really think that the way that the writer highlighted their relationship back and forth, because it only takes place over, like, I think two pages, you already, just in those 2 pages, get a sense of their whole relationship, not just in this interaction. You can imagine Mr. Drew coming home from work and asking Nancy about her day and how he is so excited to hear about it. And then also her asking him about the things that happened at the office or whatever. So then on Sunday, she goes to visit Ira in the hospital. Of course, it's Sunday, and you never used to be able to get anything done on Sunday because it was a church, it was the Sabbath, and you did not work on Sunday. I don't know how much that is still now. I do know that when I worked like in the hospital before, unless it was urgent, things got done on Monday. They did not get done on the weekend. So you either had to get it done Friday or things weren't happening until Monday. And then I like how you get more of a sense also of Nancy's not the type of character to just sit around and wait for news. When things aren't happening or moving as fast as they could be, she is like, I'm going to go out and do some investigation. And you do get that a little bit also in Mr. Drew's kind of like cute, funny comment where he's like, when you were younger, I used to tell you, hold your horses. And now I'm like telling you again, you gotta be showing some patience there. Don't expect to get things immediately. Like, don't get your hopes up. And then she kind of teases him about it. You also get more into her thoughts on Edgar. She's a bit more apprehensive of being accusatory in this one. And she does ask, hey, is Edgar really as bad as everyone's saying? So you get a bit more of her questioning here, especially from Mrs. O'Brien and Mrs. Malley. And you really get a sense of her detective work a bit more. They mention, oh, there was like all of these letters that he just like let fly everywhere, and then we had to go clean them up and we just tossed them in the trash. She's like, hold up, a bunch of paperwork that flew out of the car? And the line, I'm certainly not going to get my hopes up of becoming a millionaire. That was a cute line to me. I really liked it. Because while they comment, that's a very good, sensible thing to say. Going back to her when she was teasing her father about that's a very lawyer thing to say, you kind of get that it's like her father's upbringing is coming through her in that line of dialogue. So Nancy's a little bit of her father. I just think it's cute. I just thought that was cute. Oh, and then you get that really cute line from the housekeeper, like, I hope a copy of the whole letter will come soon. Like, she's excited too. So all of these, this is the 8th mystery, right? This is the 8th book. So Hannah Gruen and Mr. Drew have been through 7 other mystery books with Nancy so far, right? They have heard her go on and on about the stuff going on in her life, and they are still like, ooh, another mystery. I'm so excited to be a part of this, and I'm so excited to like find out more about this. So again, it highlights just how wholesome their relationship is, how much they care for each other, and that sort of thing. I feel like that was the biggest thing that came across in this chapter, apart from Nancy's drive to be an active character in her story, not just sitting around, but actually getting up and doing things and finding out information. And then, of course, at the very end, you really get that when she goes after Edgar Nixon. And I think this also highlights, again, just how she's a young narrator in her story. She's a teenager. As an adult, maybe in a movie you would get an adult character by themselves going after a culprit. It's a little bit different. Nancy is, a woman again. And alone chasing after this adult man. So you really get this more sense of her running into danger without really thinking the consequences through. And that happens at the end of the chapter where the dilapidated bridge, you hear the cracking sounds and then the chapter ends. So it's like, does she get across? Does she fall into the river in the car? I don't know. That would be sad if she lost her convertible. But I mean, regardless, you get the sense that she's still young running after this man and not really thinking through the consequences of what could actually happen to her. What's she going to do when she catches up to him? He's obviously running away. She's heard all of this stuff about how brazen he is, how mean and cruel he can be. She doesn't know if he's violent. He could seriously hurt her, and these are not things that she's actively thinking about when she's chasing after him. As always, please let me know your thoughts and your comments below on the chapter, on the characters, on any of the action sequences. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Is there anything that you noticed that I missed? Please do let me know. If you would like to see what else I do around on the internet, you can follow my Linktree, check out my Patreon. All of my spicier stories are over there, and they drop on Wednesdays and Saturdays, either in video form or in audio form. Again, my lowest tier is only $1.50 per month. Anyone who supports me for $5 a month also gets access to my Discord. I do photo sets every month for boudoir and non-boudoir. Those drop on the 25th of every month. All of my links will be down below. And I will see everyone next week, Monday for chapter 4, and on Thursday for poetry. Bye!